Good evening and welcome to the Institute for Government for a rather different format event. We've never done this at the Institute for Government before, but as some of you know, this is the latest in our series on women leaders, in which we're absolutely delighted to be working jointly with Ernst & Young, and hopefully some of you have been to our previous events, but we thought it was very timely to have a debate about quotas. We didn't realise when we decided this just quite how timely it would be. Last week, the LSE published their report of their Gender and Power Commission, which recommended mandatory quotas for women in decision-making positions. Today, the Women's Equality Party launched, not that you'll be able to tell that from the BBC website, which seems to have deemed that not to be news. Quite interesting against some of the things that they do deem to be news today. But anyway, we might talk about that later. So it's very, very timely, and the civil service yesterday, I think, was celebrating its progress on diversity and inclusion. And you can read a blog about that from one of our speakers tonight, Sue Owen. So what we're going to do is, this is a real debate. So we're going to start off by asking you to vote. You will find on your cards, which you're all sitting on, a yellow card and a blue card. And I don't know whether you watch The Apprentice, You're Fired. If you don't, watch it tomorrow night, because one of our panelists, Francis Dickens, is actually on it as one of the experts. So what we're going to say in an extraordinarily scientific and rigorous approach is, if you think now you are for the motion, that this House believes that voluntary targets are not enough to take forward gender equality quotas that are required, please raise your blue card. If you oppose that motion at the moment, please raise your yellow card, and my little helpers will count, and we will tell you at the end of the first speakers what the baseline position was, and then we will see if anyone changes their mind through an hour and a half of very rigorous debate. So first of all, could we have a show of cards? Okay, little helpers counting. If there's anyone in the innovation room, you're being counted there as well. That's our next door room. Okay, so hold it there while my counters count, and I'll just tell you how we're going to run this. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up our speakers two at a time. We're going to start with the people in favour of the motion, and then go to the opponents of the motion. They're going to speak for a maximum of 8 minutes each. We have extremely rigorous timing. They will be warned at 6 minutes. They will then have a brief opportunity to ask each other questions. Then, when they've all spoken, we're going to bring them all up. They hopefully by then should all be arranged on the panel. And then we're going to wander around and get comments and questions from the audience. So you have your chance to put your view on the record, whatever. Remember, if you're a civil servant, that this is on the record, it is being filmed, so don't say anything that you don't want your permanent secretary to be reading tomorrow. But you're all clever enough to navigate that. So without further ado, I'm going to go straight away to our first panelist to speak for the motion, and we're very delighted to have Silvana Koch-Mehrin, who is a German member of the European Parliament from 2000 to 2014, and she is the founder of the Women in Parliament's Global Forum, a worldwide network of female politicians. She was a vice president of the European Parliament, and she was also the first vice president of the Alliance. She was first vice president of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, which has the acronym ALDI, which sort of means something a bit different here. Anyway, from 2004 to 2009. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Silvana.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this extremely fascinating and interesting debate. I think this is a way to distract me, right? Maybe it's discriminating against height. I might take off my shoes that I can see you all, and not only. Anyways, well, my toenails are okay, I guess. No, but I'll sort of manage. Well, I'm here to make the case, or try to make the case, for why do we absolutely need quotas in politics and in public administration. And let me start by just a few headlines which I would like to just present to you, and maybe from there develop why I do believe that those quotes, thank you so much. I knew that there is technology in good hands if there's a man who is dealing with it. So politics is full of quotas. And gender quotas, to call them that way and to introduce them, would be a matter of transparency and of honesty. Also, politics today is a macho business. We all know that from the various ways of how politicians present themselves, how they talk, and I believe those pictures here on the walls are very well chosen because it actually shows there's one woman in the background, everybody else are men, and that's the way politics are perceived today. So politics right now is not a meritocracy. It's not something where you can excel because of what you do, but mainly because of who you know and who you are close to, and also how do you play that game that are set by rules that seem to be ancient and also made mainly by men. So to break those vested interests of power and of networks, and to give the space and the seats to the majority of the population, and that is what politics is about in a democracy. It's the representation of the people. So to give that space, you need tough and you need really decisive measures. It's nice to have affirmative action, it's nice to have mentoring, it's nice to have special training for women. That's all not enough. It's nice to have, but it's not changing the game. What you need is quotas, which are really setting the targets clearly and which are also, when not met, sanctioned and feasibly and tangibly sanctioned. So right now we have a very clear situation, that is that the gender gap, meaning how are men and women represented or can participate in politics, is huge. Almost 80% of the parliamentary seats around the globe are held by men. More than 80% of government positions are held by men. And of all the countries that we have around the world, maximum of 20 are currently led by women, presidents or prime ministers, elected functions, not monarchies. But of those, you need to keep in mind that some of those functions are mainly representative and not necessarily power positions. So there is a lot to do in order to close that gap and to bring more women into positions of influence and of power. And this would take way too long if you would say, looking back at the trajectory of the last 40, 50 years and how did it develop, and assuming that there would be a further development into having more women participate in those political games and also achieving parliamentary seats or positions of influence. But this would take another 40, 50 years at least if you would assume that the current speed is held. But what you can many times see is that in those countries where you already achieved a certain threshold, and this is mainly the Scandinavian countries, that in recent elections there is again a change, and women are the ones who very often are dropping out when it comes to looking at some Scandinavian countries, some more maybe right-wing or populist parties being elected. So we need quotas in order to close that gender gap, because political representation is, as I said, about representation of people, it's about intelligent decision, it's about bringing in the most possible diverse views as possible for the discussions and for the decision making. So let me just say 3 points on why this is necessary. So closing the gender gap in politics by means of a quota is not only a moral issue, which it is, but closing the gender gap in politics is definitely not a charity issue. It's not having women participate because they also should have their place. No, it's because they have the right to do that. So it's not a charity issue. And closing the gender gap in politics is a good governance, is a leadership, and is an economic issue. And we've been just told that the London School of Economics came out with a recommendation. The OECD, which is definitely not a feminist assembly, came out with that recommendation a few years ago, saying we do need quota in business and in politics in order to get to the best possible decision making in both areas. So let me just elaborate very shortly on two areas that I know best. One is the EU administration, because I've been serving in the European Parliament for 10 years, and then you might have heard that from my accent, German politics, where my party is the only party which is not really believing in affirmative action even, not to say quotas. So, EU administration. So what we can see there, the entrance into that really in the administration that tends to have very, very high entrance levels, the majority of those who make it are women. So this is an objective criteria, it's tested. What abilities do you have? Majority of those who pass are women. Next level up, head of unit, only 25% of those are women. What happens? Networks kick in, it's not anymore about meritocracy. And then the top level, you've got quotas, because we've got in the EU, we have political quotas, nationality quotas, all kinds of quotas, including gender quotas. So there you have, again, 30 to 40% women. So this is one of the examples. And now the German politics, we do have, she's been oftenly said to be the most powerful woman of the world, Angela Merkel, as the leader of the country, which did change the style of politics. There's less shouting, there's more arguing. Big difference. And we have the highest number ever of women in parliamentary seats and in government, which is due to obvious role models and also because all political parties, apart from my own, which I have to unfortunately admit, took this kind of decisions to introduce quotas. So thank you very much, and I would be very happy to answer any kind of questions.
That was a great kick-off, and well done on staying to time, Silvana. And I'm going to invite Jo Swinson. Jo actually spoke at our first Women Leaders event when we were looking at women going into Parliament. Jo, unfortunately, is no longer in Parliament. You'll remember her. She was a Liberal Democrat minister in the last administration. She is now non-executive director of the data intelligence company Clear Returns, and she is going to oppose the motion. So, delighted to introduce Jo Swinson.
That quotas are the answer. And I'll say that for three reasons. The first, that quotas can stall progress by masking deeper problems. Secondly, voluntary action can secure more genuine buy-in at senior levels to tackle the issues. And thirdly, that making quotas the be-all and end-all is misleading when it's much wider organisational change that is needed. So, we have an urgent need to deal with the gender inequality in this country. We have more CEOs called Dave than there are women in the FTSE 100. We have fewer than a third of members of Parliament are women, and there has never been a woman Chancellor of the Exchequer or Defence Secretary. So yes, we absolutely need to change things. But by introducing quotas, there is a real danger that the underlying root causes do not get addressed. And actually, I think that embarrassment is quite a powerful motivator for change. And I can now speak with some authority on that, given the position of Liberal Democrats in Parliament since the election, with, very sadly, no women MPs whatsoever. But that does mean that the party leadership is pretty embarrassed about the issue. And lo and behold, the new leader, Tim Farron, has unveiled his new shadow cabinet, more than half of whom are women, and drawing beyond the confines of the Commons, looking at the Lords and the wider party. And I think that that motivator is an important one. And the danger is that if you have lots of women MPs, but you don't solve the problems, then you can end up in a sense of complacency. So Labour got a lot more women MPs, and I give credit to Labour for achieving many more women MPs as a result of their quotas and all-women shortlists. But if you look at their record in local government,
isn't particularly better than any other parties. If you look at what happens when Labour have mixed shortlists for parliamentary selections, it's almost always the men that win in those contests. And I have to say I was profoundly depressed at the outcome of the recent leadership and London mayoral candidacy elections within the Labour Party, when you had female candidates who, in my view, were head and shoulders above the men, and yet somehow, in every case, it was still blokes that won. So I would argue that having quotas doesn't actually deliver the wider change that you need, and in some ways can actually mask that. Leaders need to be challenged on their record and not be able to hide behind a fig leaf that they've sorted out one bit of it without dealing with the wider picture. So voluntary action can actually secure more authentic and ingrained commitment to tackling the problems. And if we look at the example of business, where the Davies Review has achieved its target of 25% women on boards by 2015, that's not the final end point, but that is the target that was set for this year. And that has been achieved by having targets and lots of work and commitment by government, by chief executives, by chairmen, by many people within that arena to deliver the change and to keep a relentless focus on it. And clearly it needs to go further. The exec pipeline is where there are significant challenges to deal with next. But this has been dealt with as a business issue. It's not some kind of tick box compliance exercise because they have to do it. It's something which has therefore garnered genuine ownership and buy-in. As an aside, I would say that while I don't believe quotas are the answer, I do think the threat of quotas can be a particularly powerful instrument, and the EU debates on that matter, I think, were a very helpful element of the context that the Davies Review was held within. My third point is that making quotas the be-all and end-all does detract from the wider organisational change that's needed. We are in a situation where we don't just need to think about changing the women. We've been trying to do that for ages as if it's the women that are the problem, when actually we need to be changing the organisations. Now, there's lots of programmes to support women in leadership, and that's fine, because with such inequality, it can be a more hostile environment. But we need to be looking at the organisations, in detail at the processes, at recruitment, at promotion, whether there are barriers in there which haven't been considered and that need to be ripped out. We need to look at the policies, not just the formal written policies, but the actual lived experience within an organisation of whether flexible working is a reality rather than just being something which is a good policy. And I think importantly, we need to be looking at this from the perspective of men in the organisation taking up flexible working, using shared parental leave, rather than just these things being seen as a women's issue. We are not going to get equality in the workplace until we have more equality at home. We need to look at the culture of organisations. Are the deals still done on the golf course? Is there a presenteeism culture where it's about how many hours you clock up rather than what the outcomes of your job actually are? And are there all sorts of different biases at play, whether that's in recruitment or whether it's in who gets asked to do that international project and the assumption that the woman with a young family, she obviously won't want to do it? We need to look at role models. Who is the organisation promoting in its panel events, in the internal communications, and what is the model behaviour of the leaders in that organisation actually doing? Are they saying one thing and doing another themselves? Most importantly, this needs to be seen as a business issue. Monitoring with KPIs on an ongoing basis, just in the same way that you would have a programme in place to control costs or a strategy to win new business, and you would question it and understand what progress had been made. We need a comprehensive and a concerted approach to solve inequality, not just a blind assumption that quotas are the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe and Silvana. I'm going to invite them to come and edge us onto the stage. Maybe they take these. Oh, we're just trying to fix Joe's microphone, so we're not going to do that. Instead, I will move seamlessly on to just tell you what our starting position was. So the starting position was that in favour of the motion, says I've had these done differently, we had 45 people in favour, and against the motion, we had 29 people as our starting point. Not scientific or whatever. I I was briefly going to invite Joe and Silvana up to see if there's any immediate questions that anyone in the audience wants to put to Joe or Silvana before I invite our next panelist. Any quick questions in the audience? Yes.
Why can't we do both?
I think the point that I made about voluntary action being a way of securing more genuine buy-in, I think is an important one. I think there is a whole range of action that needs to be taken, and my concern about the quota debate is often that so much energy gets expended and tied up in whether or not it should be quotas or all women shortlists in the political arena, that not nearly enough attention is focused on developing a wide range of interventions that are going to sit alongside that. And I think the example that we've seen, certainly in the UK in the political system, has very much demonstrated that case, that once you get the quotas, actually the appetite to do a lot of other things rather diminishes.
So Joe, do you have any questions to Silvana about what she was saying?
Well, I was interested in the Scandinavian experience, because you seem to be saying that they'd managed to make some progress by having quotas, but then they were still finding that women were dropping out. And do you not think that that underlines and proves that point, that there is this wider cultural piece that needs to be done?
What I tried to say was that even though societal change has happened, and it's a consensus that women are not questioned in taking leadership roles, most of those countries would have had female prime ministers or presidents and a high percentage of women in both business and political leadership. But even then, you can't take it for granted that once you have reached the societal consensus that things are going always smoothly, that with the rise of populist parties, which we've seen in Finland, in Sweden, in unfortunately most of the Scandinavian countries, that there is a challenge to that societal consensus, so that even in countries where we have that change and where it's the majority opinion, it's still not, you can't take things for granted, you need to remain vigilant. That's what's the point I tried to make.
Okay, I think that's very good. We're going to move on, she said. And now we're going to move on to our next speaker in favour of the motion, and that's Dr. Andre Spicer. Spicer, I have to say. Andre is Professor of Organisational Behaviour at the Cass Business School. He's the founding director of Ethos, and he's written very extensively on lots of organisation and leadership questions. So to oppose the motion, to speak in favour of the motion, Dr. Andre Spicer.
Many people say that quotas are too political. My response to that is not having quotas is a political choice. We have to remember the old Groucho Marx quote. As we know, politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it, misdiagnosing it, and applying the wrong solutions. So let me put politics aside for a second and begin to get to some real solutions, which I think is around, we'll see. So as far as I can see, there are basically three options which we can put forward to have a more equal society, a more equal distribution of power, and avoid the collective lobotomy which we've been suffering in the last so many years, and avoid the kind of male-dominated organisations. Option one. Option one is that we screen all male job applicants for top positions on the basis of whether they have daughters or not, right? Recent research has showed that men who have daughters tend to close the gender pay gap, close the gender power gap, and they'll also spend far more on social responsibility and other kinds of things which we would hope in business. So that's one option. Option two, we identify a pool of talented people who we consider past the minimum basis, and then we randomly select those people who goes into the top job. This basically, research which has been done on this, natural experiments show that you actually get exactly the same performance outcomes, but you get more equal gender basis on the basis of random selection. Option three, we impose quotas. Now, it seems that probably option one and option two would be questioned, to put it mildly, by people. So people would say we don't want to select basis of people on the basis of their children. I mean, we seem to have absolutely no problem on the basis of selecting people on the basis of their parents, but selecting people on the basis of their children, well, that's another thing. The second thing, random selection. Well, we have this kind of innate belief that there are certain people who are so utterly talented and other people who aren't, even though the evidence seems to suggest the opposite. So, okay, let's put that aside. Let's be very modest about this and put this aside, and let's make a very modest proposal and go for quotas. So many people would say, I think as Joe's pointed out, well, quotas have failed in Scandinavia, doesn't necessarily work there, etc. Well, let's just take a little look at the evidence, right? There are some people, such as, strangely enough, the cleaning company Sodexo released a survey on this, where they're kind of making these miraculous claims about the benefits of having women in top leadership in business, like 40-something, 48% or something like this, improved profitability. Well, that's nonsense, to be quite honest, if you look at the academic research. However, there are slight benefits of having women in power, and this is shown both in the Norwegian case but in other cases. The interesting thing is that objectively, companies who have women in senior positions on the board do better on objective criteria, such as return on assets, return on investment. Subjectively, they do worse. So they do worse on subjective criteria, which are things like share price. Why do I say share price is subjective? Because basically the major determinants of share price of what analysts are saying, who are analysts? Men, right? And men tend to then have this kind of idea that once a woman gets in a place of power, the company's not going to do as well. So it seems to be that there's actually a lot of evidence that markets, when a woman gets appointed to a directorship, take a little bit of fright for a while. The share price goes down a tiny bit, and then they get back to their senses, and it kind of goes back to normal. So what we see again is this kind of point which you were raising, which is on the objective criteria, women do slightly better. On subjective criteria, which seems to be shaped largely by male biases, women do slightly worse. So there seems to be kind of absolutely no reason for this. If we actually then again look at the evidence, look at how boards behave. If you get a woman on a board, what you tend to find is that women attend the boards far more. They also create peer pressure for men to attend more. There's less conflict on the boards, and also people basically, there's a kind of a better working process. If you do this in experiments, have more women in groups, that tends to lead to higher outcomes in groups. It's a better predictor of performance in groups than the average collective intelligence of a group, right? Having women in it. So we spend billions on increasing people's ability through education, but we could make a very, very minor change, increase the number of women in groups, and that would improve. Women tend to be better qualified when they're appointed to jobs, and also evidence from Norway, they increase innovation in firms, something many companies and organisations and indeed countries want to improve. So it's not just helped a few people in the top corporate jobs. It's also helps other people out, so it has a kind of collective welfare function for those out there who are economists. So it increases the number of women who are CEOs, it builds stronger networks within the business community, and it also improves workplace culture. And this isn't just something which is sort of limited to the nice, comfortable hallways of power in Western corporations. There was a natural experiment done in India in 1993 where basically there were some villagers who were randomly selected who women were given a quota in terms of village leadership, and there were those who weren't. I think it was, I can't remember the exact number. Now what they found is that this had a significant effect on both the aspirational gap and also the educational gap and also long-run discrimination. It closed the aspirational gap by 25% for adults. It closed the aspirational gap 33% for adolescents. It led to equal outcomes in terms of educational opportunities, and it reduced long-run discrimination. So this whole idea of the kickback effect or lashback effect, it doesn't seem to work. It actually decreases long-run discrimination. The final point which I'd like to raise here is that quotas actually encourage women to enter the game. So if you look at just about any profession, you have what we call a tournament structure. So large professional service firms are basically like a pyramid where you enter in the bottom and you're kicked out, and out. Women get kicked out more quickly than men do. If you run an experiment where you have a tournament and you have just men and women entering and just saying the best person wins, you tend to find about 29% of women enter that tournament. If you have a tournament where you say we're going to have 2 winners, one is going to be a man, one is going to be a woman, 64% of women enter the tournament. The results, you would think, well, maybe the best person doesn't come out at the end. Actually, it was still the best candidate objectively who won the tournament. So if we want to encourage women to get into the game, to get into the tournament, to compete, we need to have these quotas. So let's quit the politics, diagnose the problems correctly, and come up with the correct solution, which I believe here might be quotas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andre, and you have indeed figured out the seating pattern of coming down and then going up again. So without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted to turn now to Frances Dickens. Frances is an entrepreneur. She is Chief Executive of the Astos Group, and as aforementioned, she is also going to be on a rather more popular panel tomorrow, and she is going to speak against the motion. So, Frances.
Thank you. So, quota. Absolutely not one of my favourite words, because for me it conjures up images of bureaucracy, box ticking and government intervention. I don't believe it's the answer to achieve gender equality at senior level. A lot of attention has rightly been paid to the lack of women on the board of FTSE-listed companies. However, gender diversity stretches way beyond their oak panel boardrooms. I'm here this evening talking about business and representing female entrepreneurs. As you've heard, I co-founded and own a £200 million media company. We've got offices in the UK, China and Australia. However, according to the government's Burt report on women in enterprise, I'm actually a rarity. Just 1 business in 5 is majority owned by a woman, and overall women are a third less likely than men to start a business. I'll explain my opposition to legal quotas in a moment, but there is one thing I'd like to make clear, that the pressure on the UK to introduce mandatory quotas, as you've heard from everybody, is mounting. Among the major EU economies, the UK stands alone in pursuing voluntary targets. 2 weeks ago, the report that you mentioned has called again for mandatory gender quotas for senior positions across the private and public sectors in the UK. So why shouldn't the UK bow to the seemingly inevitable and introduce these quotas? Well, I've got 5 reasons that I'm going to argue with you tonight. First of all, absolutely, business-led change needs to be given a chance to work. Mandatory quotas, as I understand it, exist to tackle gender discrimination. Those all-boy networks, unfortunately, alive and well in companies across the world that always select the best man for the job. But in those countries where mandatory quotas exist, was a business-led approach given a solid chance to work first? I agree that the UK's figure of 25%, which we talked about, is considerably lower than Norway, where mandatory quotas actually came into force almost 10 years ago, and where I think we've heard the representation stands at around 40%. However, the UK figure has been achieved via voluntary business-led change driven by the Davies Review. I know the figure's the tip of the iceberg in terms of the task ahead, but what it shows is that with the right political framework, which includes requiring companies to be more accountable, business-led change is achievable. It's in fact an interesting example of that is how it's working, is the criticism that was levelled at Glencore, the mining company, last year. They were the last FTSE 100 company to have an all-male board. They were publicly lambasted by politicians, no, probably publicans too actually, and the media for failing to appoint a woman to the board. And then of course their big investors actually declined to approve their reports or accounts for the same reason. They bowed to pressure. They appointed Koch-Mehrin, to a non-exec position, but my point is that this happened without mandatory quotas. My second issue is that they don't advance the cause of gender equality. You know, take a seat, love, you're here to make up the numbers. My understanding of equal opportunities is that men and women have an equal chance to compete for senior positions on the basis of qualifications and merit. Introducing quotas undermines the concept of hiring the best person for the job, which should surely be the guiding principle of recruitment at every level of all organisations. Yeah, let's investigate why men and women aren't competing equally for the top jobs, and let's tackle that head on. But no one I know, male or female, want to feel that they landed a senior role, or actually any role, just because of a quota system. In fact, if we go back to Norway, as I understand it, a lot of the roles held by women there are firstly non-executive and secondly the same women sit on multiple boards. They are actually charmingly known as the golden skirts. And I don't think that sounds much like a victory for gender equality. I don't think anybody would want to call me a golden skirt. So, and then my third reason is the commercial case for boardroom diversity is a no-brainer. I think Andre touched on some of this, that there is nothing like the bottom line to motivate change. And evidence is absolutely mounting that gender diversity is good for business. A recent Credit Suisse report revealed that where there is just one female in the boardroom, companies have higher ROE since 2005 than for all male boards. And according to Grant Thornton, the opportunity cost of male-only boards for the UK amounts to £48 billion. My fourth issue is the risk of mission creep. If, as a government, you go down the route of mandatory quotas, where do you draw the line? Boardroom diversity isn't just confined to gender. Our boards aren't ethnically diverse either. Can you set mandatory quotas for gender diversity without doing ethnic diversity as well? And what about LGBT? Do you just stop at the boardroom, or would you be setting diversity quotas for other levels of management? But if so, aren't we at the risk of an unfeasibly high level of government intervention in how companies are run? And then my fifth, and you're probably hoping final point, is that the reasons for prevailing gender inequality at senior levels are very complex, and I think that legislation is far too blunt an instrument to address them. Harvard Business School recently interviewed 4,000 participants and found that compared to men, women had a higher number of life goals, but placed far less importance on the power-related goals, such as climbing the career ladder. Interestingly, the women viewed the high-level positions as equally attainable as men did, they just didn't want to do them. So, at the risk of pleasing all those corporate dinosaurs who claim that women want to stay at home with babies, I'm still not sure it's an issue that can be tackled using mandatory quotas. However, we have to tackle it. Women make a vital contribution to the economy. The Grant Thornton research suggested, in fact, that the impact of moving to mixed boards on the FTSE 350 would increase UK GDP by around 3%. So what needs to be done? The list is endless, but I'm sure you'll be happy to hear I've narrowed it down to what I think are three key action points. We need to keep the Davies report going. We've already talked about that. We know how key it has been. Yes, we've met the original target, but it's got to continue, or we have to replace it with an initiative with equal clout, because we have to have ambitious targets for women in boardrooms, in executive board roles as well, not just as non-execs. And for companies about to be listed, we should be looking as well at diversity outside of the FTSE companies, public, private sectors, charity and media as well. I think we have to keep publicising the progress of the UK's biggest companies, as well as naming and shaming those that don't do as well. I was actually pretty horrified at reports last month about two companies, both preparing for flotations worth billions of pounds, Hastings, the insurer, and WorldPay. Neither of them had any female representation on their boards. I mean, you've just got to be asking, where have they been? I would really like to see us moving to a position where companies with all male boards are actively discouraged from joining the stock exchange until they've remedied the situation. And then we need to keep researching the reasons why women aren't reaching the top jobs in sufficient numbers. I've mentioned this apparent conflict, which was highlighted by that Harvard research, that women perceive the difference they perceive between career advancement and the conflict with other life goals. How can companies, government and pressure groups work together to solve this conundrum and enable women to feel that they can successfully balance career and life ambitions? So to conclude, better boardroom diversity isn't just good for women, it's good for business, for whole economies and for society. And I firmly believe that there is the commercial, cultural and political momentum to improve gender diversity without the need for mandatory quotas.
Thank you, Francis. So we've had two quite interesting takes on that issue from our panellists. Any immediate question for either of our panellists there? Yes, in the front row.
Just wanted to ask Francis, aren't the 25% non-executives or other women on boards here also golden skirts. So what's the difference between what's going on here and what's going on elsewhere?
Well, Vicky, you're probably a much better statistician than I am, because I'm in business at the sharp edge, and I don't actually know how many you would consider to be golden skirts here, but I do believe it is far less than in Norway. Still, definitely too many women in non-exec roles here, but because it's a voluntary target, and I think those people that are adopting it are making the real effort, I do think we are getting genuine women on boards who are there to do the right job. And I think the more we talk about and publicise the effect to the bottom line of these companies, the more companies will realise that it's something that is right for them to do, not because somebody is telling them to do it.
So, Andre, do you want to pick up this golden skirt issue? It's sort of the same few women get on loads of boards, they're a bit tokenistic, and actually it's all non-execs and not solving the executive issue at all.
So Francis is absolutely right. There's actually quite a large, there's basically one of the issues that the quota system has created is an elite of women who sit on boards within Norway, but we have an elite of men who sit on boards here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would sort of make the point that I mean, one way to begin to democratize or sort of have to harness the talent which is out there is to include at least half of the picture. But I think that there's far more that needs to be done. And it's not just about thinking about women on boards. We've been doing some work with a number of businesses recently which begins to ask how can you push this down, particularly around middle management, and how can you use this to kind of really drive change, which I think speaks a little bit to your concerns, but I would say that by putting something at the top of their mind often forces behaviour. Okay, excellent. We'll have a chance to come back to all these questions again, so I'm going to move on to our final pair of speakers. We're absolutely delighted to have Uschi Schreiber. Uschi is from the EY Global Markets Group. She's EY's Global Markets leader, but she's also done a huge range of jobs in the public sector as well, in a variety of countries, most notably and interestingly Australia. So we're going to draw on that wide experience, and Uschi is going to speak in favour of the motion.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Einstein said that we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. Our colleagues opposite are giving you just the same old thinking in this much debated topic, the same old thinking that got us to where we are today. So I will show you how we need to change the system to get more women into senior business leadership roles. An abundance of studies from the likes of EY, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, various schools of management here in the UK, anywhere else, and many others, have shown that greater board and leadership diversity is correlated with higher returns on equity, higher price book valuations, and superior overall performance. For example, McKinsey in 2010 reported a 41% higher return on equity for companies with the highest share of women on their boards compared to companies with no women on their board. Credit Suisse in 2014 reported that companies with more than one woman on the board have returned a compound 2 to 4% premium on return of equity over those that have none. And companies with at least one female board member outperformed those with no women on the board by 26% in overall performance. So the studies overwhelmingly support the conclusion of better performance associated with women on boards. Now, has this evidence had any impact at all? Very little, when we consider the poor representation of women in senior business and board roles today. So let me share with you what I believe needs to be done. First point. We need to proactively intervene to respond to market failure. We are dealing with market failure here, something our friends opposite argue we should perpetuate. In contrast, I argue that quotas are the most effective market intervention in this case. I'm a member of the executive board of a global multi-billion-dollar organization, and I can tell you, effective interventions focus on measurable results within defined timeframes, and they address the causative issues. Two alternatives are being discussed here today and are often discussed: the set your own targets, self-regulatory approach, and the externally assigned quotas. Now, the great weakness of self-regulation is that if you don't have a clear collective result in mind, how do you know how well you're doing as a society or as a business community? So what if there's been progress somewhere in the last year? Is it enough? Not enough? Too much? Should we have more? Who knows? You don't know. We need societal targets, which is in fact exactly what quotas are. Not targets defined voluntarily by individual companies, or worse, by individual CEOs. Voluntary targets might not survive, and we've seen it, from CEO to CEO, whereas quotas set a societal expectation. Are quotas effective? So we've heard some of the evidence on both sides of the argument, in fact. Just one more angle on the Norwegian example, where a quota system, as we know, was introduced in 2003. It resulted in a rise from around 5% of women on boards in 2000 to 42% in 2009. Now let me contrast that with the German experience. The Germans introduced a voluntary scheme 1 year earlier than Norway introduced its quotas. Where did it get Germany? To only 10.6% representation of women on boards and 3.2% in senior management in 2009. So big contrast. Not surprisingly, Germany has now introduced a quota scheme. Second point, dominant groups need external triggers before they share power. Thousands of years of human history tell us that dominant groups are interested mainly in maintaining the status quo. Let's be honest here. Dave, the CEO, is not going to wake up one morning to say to Steve or whatever, the other CEO, I don't know what we've thought all these years, mate. We got it wrong when we made all the decisions without women. All these wars we started, economic crises we were responsible for, unhappiness we created, whatever. Let's do this all differently now. I mean, that's just not going to happen. Instead, dominant groups use their power to create a set of societal structures and behavioral norms that enhance the stability of their system and advance their own security. Women today work in corporate settings where they are judged not by a set of neutral performance indicators, but by standards that reflect the power differences that perpetuate public and private lives. They are just judged by masculine standards masquerading as neutral. This is the system that has created the current imbalance. This cannot just be changed from within. Further, unequal power relationships often deny non-dominant groups the opportunity to participate in decision-making processes that directly affect them. This raises the question to our colleagues opposite whether male-dominated boards or leadership team really are the right groups to self-impose targets and change the system. After all, it is still the dominant group making decisions in the interest of the vastly underrepresented one. I could, of course, be more provocative and argue that the self-regulation is case in point. Does the dominant group want to be seen to be doing something in order to avoid stronger actions such as quotas, which would fundamentally change the power imbalance? Men might think self-regulation works, but women generally don't. A Heidrick and Struggle survey of board members in 26 countries in 2011 found that more than 3 times as many women supported quotas as men, and 53% of women versus 18% of men thought quotas are effective. So as predicted, the opposite side has argued that women should be appointed on merit and not just because they are women. I say start appointing men on the basis of merit and not just because they are men. If the system was truly meritorious, surely we would have already appointed more women. And to the women who worry that they could be perceived to be appointed merely because they are women, I say this is happening anyway, and it's happening with or without quotas. Every time a woman is appointed to a senior position, someone will say she only got the job because she is a woman. So let's focus on real action and stop talking. We've talked about this issue for long enough. The evidence is very strong. The evidence is clear. So let's not do what we've been doing in the past. Change is fundamentally about mobilizing action, and not all talk leads to action. I remind those on the negative that when leaders emphasize strategies for understanding the issues or taking voluntary action over strategies for real systemic action, we're not likely to see real rapid change. So, ladies and gentlemen, quotas are the only means of stopping comfortable incrementalism and achieving real change quickly. Let's just do it. Support quotas tonight.
Thank you very much, Uschi. And I'm absolutely delighted that our final speaker tonight is Sue Owen. Sue is Permanent Secretary at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. Be very interesting to hear whether actually some of the arguments we've heard about private sector boards apply in the public sector. Because Sue not only is Permanent Secretary, she is also responsible for making an absolutely inordinate number of public appointments at DCMS, which is Quango central in many ways. So she sees this from many angles. So delighted to introduce Sue Owen.
Well, thank you, Jill. I mean, what else is there left to say, really? But there we are. I'll have a go. I'll focus a bit more on the civil service and the government sector, which I know. So one of a previous female permanent secretaries, who Jill knows too, always used to say, what is the problem we are trying to solve? And in the civil service, it's that the leadership has largely, in the past, been white, straight males without disabilities who did Greek and Latin at Oxford. Not just males. They were white, straight males without disabilities. So I think the problem we're trying to solve is far wider than that of gender equality. So, you know, the moral case is incredibly important, but it hasn't made a great deal of difference. And I agree with everybody that the business case for a better balance in the leadership of organisations is now incredibly strong. So you make more profits in the public sector, your departments perform better. You also make better policy if the people making the policy are more representative of the population. And actually, you give better customer service and you have happier staff if your staff are representative of the population. So what do we need to get the business case to work? We do need a cultural shift. We need a permanent increase to better reflect society and customers. And I think it's important that this is not just about gender, but other underrepresented groups as well. So will quotas do it? Not in my view, for several reasons. So tokenism is the first. We've all been there. Interestingly, actually, when I first came to DCMS on my executive team of 7, there was one man. And it was not nirvana at all. It was absolutely dreadful. And it really brought home the message to me that it's a balance that you need. So I don't think quotas deliver you true inclusion, and I have seen examples, and some of them are in the splendid document the IFG have just produced, about women who were sort of brought in to the top of the Treasury just to make up, so they had a woman there. And it very rarely worked. They very rarely were felt included, and they stayed a couple of years and they left. So I think it's important that you don't set people up to fail. I think also we've all been talking about a focus on the top, but I think we need more fulfillment of potential all the way up in an organisation. So when I talk to women and ethnic minority groups, LGBT, I always say to people, you know, it's not just about getting to be the top of the organisation or even on the board, but you all need to aspire to get at least one higher than you thought that you could get. And I don't think that quotas for people at the top would deliver you anything about representation lower down. I don't think quotas address entrenched biases in any way. I think trying to operate quotas for gender and for disability and for LGBT, you could get yourself into a terrible twist about that. I don't think quotas change leadership behaviours. And by the way, in the UK, they're illegal. They can only be used to level the playing field in recruitment. So you can choose on the basis of an underrepresented group if you're choosing between two otherwise identically qualified people. You can't appoint solely on the basis of gender or sexual orientation, except we do have one exception in the Sex Discrimination Act where we do allow for all women shortlists for Parliament. So my preference is for aspirational targets. In public appointments, we are aspiring to 50% women. We have managed in the year so far to get up to 44%. We've heard a lot about the Lord Davis review, which has made a massive difference. Already, you know, between 2004 and 2011, the proportion of women on boards went up by only 2.8 percentage points. Since the Davis review, it's gone up by another 8.2 percentage points. In the civil service, we are doing a lot better. In the senior management grades, the proportion of women has gone up from 17% about 15 years ago to 38% now. In our other underrepresented groups, we're doing much, much worse. So black and minority ethnic, only 7% compared to population average 10 to 12. Disability, only 3%. Population average, about 9. LGBT, we don't even know. So what has worked in the public sector? What has worked is focusing on the middle as well as on the top. Programs to encourage people to build up their confidence and their leadership skills. The civil service has always been a meritocracy and prided itself that we do choose the best people, but we need to make sure that everybody can show themselves in the best light. So the things that have worked best, the departments that have done better at promoting women and ethnic minority folk and so on, are ones that have actively tried to assemble the field for interviews, trying to increase confidence to apply, encourage people not to feel a failure if they don't get a job. Some work on panels, thinking very hard about the composition of panels. Panels that include a more junior member of staff than the post being recruited to are much, much more successful at appointing women and other underrepresented groups, because they're actually, staff members are much better able to spot the good leaders. Batch recruitment works much better than recruiting just to one post. If you recruit to maybe 12 posts all at once, it's much easier then to make sure that you've got good representation amongst your field. Transparency, incredibly important, something the Davis Review did as well, but actually publishing your data about representation at all your levels, including on gender pay gaps. Advertising all jobs, not just moving people around. We've got much better like that in the civil service, except during crises when they still tend to pick a man. And also valuing skills that are really needed for leadership jobs. I think that's incredibly important. I always say to women, if you can get Christmas dinner on the table with 6 different vegetables and everything hot by 2 o'clock, likelihood is you'll be good at program project management. If you can deal with playground squabbles, likelihood is that you can deal a lot of the kind of squabbles you get at the top of organisations. So valuing skills like organisational skills and emotional intelligence rather than just intellectual skills, I think also incredibly important. We have now got diversity objectives for all permanent secretaries that are published, and we will be publishing a lot of data, and that really focuses the mind of people on top of organisations. The IFG report is going to be a case in point. Everybody will hate reading some of that stuff. So it does need continued effort, and I think we can do that through aspirational targets rather than quotas.
Thanks very much, Sue. What we're going to do is, if there's anyone in the other room, we have 6 places at the front, 7 places at the front here if anyone wants to filter in. What we're going to do now is get comments, questions. Questions can be addressed to the whole panel or just 1 or 2. So if people want to come in, and who would like to kick off? Yes. Tell us who you are.
Caroline Davis, Chief Executive Design Commission for Wales. Given the business evidence and some of the other hard evidence that's been quoted, and the opportunity to have access to greater talent, higher performance across the board, to the no campaign, why would you not want to speed that up? And to the yes campaign, what do you think that resistance is based on?
Okay, so who would like to speak for the no campaign? Jo.
Well, I started off by saying I think we need much faster progress. I just don't believe that quotas are the best way to do it, nor actually do I believe that they are necessarily a faster way to achieve the progress that we need. I think by forcing organisations and leaders in those political business organisations to have the really tough transparency and to make it happen without it being a mechanism in place, then they have to be a lot more innovative in how they solve that and how they make it happen. I don't accept that it needs to take longer.
Okay, yes, Uschi.
Sure. Look, I mean, I've worked in senior roles in both government as well as the private sector. And my observation is that I think what holds it back is unconscious bias. That the way talent looks to people in decision-making roles is just so influenced by, you know, what Dave and Steve look and feel like, okay? And so I think, you know, in some ways the public sector is an interesting case study in this context. I mean, we publish, for example, every year or 18 months or so, a review of which we call the Global Public Sector Index for Women in Leadership Roles, which basically looks at G20 countries and the representation of senior women in leadership roles. Now, if you look at the public sector, for 40 years in most of those countries, we've had the right policies, we've got, you know, EEO policies, anti-discrimination activities, we've got legislation in some countries, all that sort of stuff. But the representation of women in senior leadership roles is still actually relatively poor if you look at the fact that we have that history. Now, a lot of that is about some of those points, obviously, that you know, you have talked about, and I completely agree with those. But they have been in place for a really long time, and they have ultimately not shifted you know, women into leadership roles in the same level that they are represented in the community, because we are not a minority group. So I think it's things like unconscious bias. I think it's buying into the concept, but then when it comes to appointing a successor to someone in a role, you know, a woman often feels and looks very differently to, you know, the guy who was there previously. So I think unconscious bias has a very big role to play, and clearly there are things one can do about that. But, you know, I mean, we've all heard this thing. She is not ready yet for that role, okay? She's generally not ready for any of these roles. And so, you know, that is also because she looks different. She isn't a Dave, right? She is whatever different person she is, you know.
Okay, going to go again to...
Hi, Matt Foster, Civil Service World. This is a question mainly for Sue, but obviously do feel free to jump in, anyone else. There's been a big push from the top of the civil service this year on diversity, and obviously we saw the Talent Action Plan published, or the refresh in March, and a big part of that has been diversity objectives for permanent secretaries. Can you explain what happens if those objectives, which are very detailed and wide-ranging, if they're not met?
Yes. Well, certainly those people won't get a top performance mark and a pay bonus, for sure. So I think that's quite an incentive for them, and there will be, I mean, it will be very public if they don't meet them.
So, Andre, come in on that. I mean, do you think that actually giving public objectives to senior people is a better alternative?
Yeah, so I mean, I study large organisations from the public sector to the private sector, and if there's one thing that comes across both in the public sector and private sector is that people have objectives and KPIs up the kazoo, as the Americans would say, and simply adding more objectives and things, which targets which they need to hit, and all of these kind of things. First of all, adds a large amount of needless kind of worry, concern, anxiety. It stretches the workday out, all of those kind of things. So that's point one. I'll come back to this point because I think it's important. Point two is people then start sorting, you know, because you only have 24 hours in the day, right? So then they start sorting which are the actual things which I'm getting rewarded on and which are the things I can perhaps get away with a little bit. And what we see in the corporate world, sure, it's a little bit shameful maybe when you go to the boardroom that you haven't hit this this target, but really bringing in delivering on your revenue targets or whatever sometimes is slightly more important. Do you mind if I just add one final point? And the point is about this kind of adding to targets and objectives and all of these kind of things which people hit, is that we get this extension of these unmanageable work days. So we often talk about one of the solutions to the gender issue is around creating work-life balance. It's not work-life balance which is the problem, it's actually work which is the problem. So we need to begin to ask, how do we make work which is better for everyone? And I think a bit of equity might help us on that.
My name's Kieran Rowe, I'm an analyst. I have a question for the in favour of the motion panel. If this kind of quota system is in place, when would you view it as a reasonable time to repeal it? What would you view as equality? And once it is repealed, is that not a bit harsh on people afterwards who are not favoured in the same way?
Okay, well, Silvana, you gave the interesting example of a bit of backsliding in the Scandinavian countries. So, eternal vigilance, are they permanent quotas or quotas for sort of Christmas until we achieve equilibrium and then we don't need them anymore?
Well, there is a lot of research which gives the figure that 30% is a threshold, that once you meet that, there is enough automatic sort of pipeline candidates coming up. So once you have that threshold, you can get to have 30% guaranteed. You can achieve more just by having an automatic filling up of positions. You can politics, for example, one extreme example, in Rwanda, there is a 30% quota for women in parliaments, and currently there are 64% in the parliament. So 30% are elected on the quota basis, and 34% are elected on the free seats, because the happiness sort of, or what women have achieved in parliament has been valued as high enough to already vote for others. And let me also on the, I mean, there are different models in both business and politics which sets those targets, but that's generally the figure. And what we can see in those Scandinavian countries, if I just get back to those two examples, in Norway and Iceland, for example, where they have introduced quota, not only for the large companies, but also small companies. In Norway, it has been introduced by a center-right male politician who was the Minister for Economic Affairs. He looked at the demographic change of Norway, he looked at the economic challenges and said, we need to stop excluding the large talent pool that we have, exactly for the reason that Uschi mentioned, that there is no level playing field when competing for positions. So that's why we introduced quota. And there was a huge uproar by the businesses associations beforehand, and after a few years they said, actually, let's keep it that way. We hate to say it, but actually without quotas we wouldn't get the results that we do now. And the same goes for Iceland. They introduced those quota system, huge uproar, and now they want to keep it in the business community. But then again, this was women also at the time demonstrating again voting rights for women and for voting rights for parliaments, and today I don't think you find many women who would say, let's have it taken away from us, we just vote nonsense.
So Francis, you were making the case that actually there's a very compelling business case for more diverse boards, and yet you didn't want quotas. But if there's this sort of economic prize out there which doesn't cost any money, isn't it just sort of dumb policy not to do it?
Well, I think it's dumb policy totally for companies that don't go with women, but I don't think forcing them to put a token woman on the board is going to be the solution. Interestingly, you just said that 30% is kind of a good threshold, and then I guess it gathers natural momentum. Given that the Davies report took us to 25% voluntarily and is still increasing, why do we need a quota to get the extra 5%?
Well, can I just challenge the voluntary thing of the 25%? I used to be, well, Joe and myself are actually in the same political family, even though on this point we're totally different point of view, but I used to be, for my group in the European Parliament, negotiator for the EU directive on introducing quotas. And what you said, actually, to have this real threat of quota legislation coming up, that's what these voluntary measures made it really happen. Without the real threat of having legislation, those voluntary measures, we could still wait for them. That's many countries in Europe, unfortunately.
Okay, let's go to more people in the audience. Yes.
Kind of a comment, but partially a question for Francis.
Oh God, why me? Why me?
Sorry.
I run a business. I don't do all this statistic stuff.
No. Sorry, Catherine Oswald. I'm from HMRC. You kind of alluded to the fact that you think that voluntary action should be given the chance to work. So do you sort of foresee a future, which I think is my position, where we might get to a point where we say voluntary action isn't working, we do need quotas, but we're just not there yet?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair, actually. But one of the big tenets of my case, as you know, was that voluntary quotas, business-driven quotas, have got to have the chance to work. And it should be about educating these companies about the effect on the bottom line, and also giving women the confidence to get out there and say, listen, I'm doing a good job for you, and I'm going to be better on your board, but not being on a board because somebody says, okay, you're on the board, but I'm just going to ignore you through this entire board meeting. Because if women get onto boards because they're the token woman, and then they don't do a good job, it actually sets the calls back, I believe. So there are an amazing number of great women out there. We just need to find the way to help them do it on their own.
So, Uschi.
I just want to comment on this because I totally agree. I think there's a huge number of fabulous women out there who could be on boards. When you talk to them, which I do frequently in various parts of the world, what they tell you is it's actually really hard to find a board, to figure out how to get on it, to figure out who to tap on the shoulder, to actually get the path paved for you onto this board. And I've got to tell you, that is the same in the US, that's the same in the UK. It doesn't matter where you have that conversation. Because, of course, many of these boards or board positions are filled, well, sometimes they're filled on the golf course by talking to someone you play or people play golf with or whatever, but there is no, there's no advertisement or whatever that says, okay, here's a board position coming up or whatever. It's very difficult for women to actually find that path, to even find out that there is a board position coming up. And so that's a big issue. And that is actually an issue where quotas can help.
Isn't that equally as difficult for men? I don't think that's a women-exclusive problem.
I think this is actually the nub of it. So there's some men who absolutely are on the right golf courses or in the right private members clubs, and it's a very homogenous group. They're not just all men, they're all, as Sue was saying, they're all a particular type of bloke. So it's not just the talent of women that we're missing out on, we're actually missing out on a huge talent pool of men that just happen to come from different perspectives. And so what you need to do is to change the mindset about how you recruit and fill a board position in the first place. Now, I think this, comes back to leadership, and it's why I think there is an opportunity now, because business is increasingly getting it. And although there might have been warm words on this over the last decade or two, I don't think this has been seen as such a business critical issue in the way that it is now, and increasingly so, where senior business leaders get it. And I mean, Andre's point was absolutely key. What are the KPIs that really matter? Yeah, what is the thing that the CEO at the board meeting is actually going to have a strop about? What is the issue that when you're going in to have a discussion with government, that actually the business secretary is going to give you a hard time if you've still got an all-male board? And it's progressing it to that kind of issue where there is the genuine leadership commitment, not just the leader of the organisation saying the right thing. I'm not going to suggest that all business leaders have got to that place yet, but I think we do have a lot more now who are in that place.
So, Sue, is there anything that business could learn from the fact that the public sector has managed to get to 44% recent appointments?
I think there is. So I think it is about transparency about advertising roles. So, in fact, in the private sector here, they do actually use headhunters quite a bit, but the jobs aren't very often advertised, but they could well go to headhunter and say, I really need some women. I'm sure they did in response to the Davis review, and the headhunters then would have some lists, and we need to get more women in front of headhunters. So I think advertising roles can help. I did some work a while ago now with the Bank of England, and getting more women into senior roles there. And one of the big issues was whether jobs were advertised or not. And they did start advertising them, and women did start trying to get them, except, as I said, when there was a crisis or something, and then they just moved someone. So I think it's these roles that are filled when there's no transparency. So I would encourage the private sector to advertise.
Andre, you want to come in?
So this is to speak in praise of something which we normally poo-poo, which is bureaucracy, right? Unfortunately, bureaucracy is probably one of the best routes to equality which we have. Bureaucracy means transparent processes, rules which are written down, steps which you go through, a bit of rationality rather than making decisions on the basis of who you happen to know, who you happen to hang out with. And this is the reason why the public sector has proceeded very well on this. And one of the kinds of forms of bureaucracy, very small type of bureaucracy which we can put in place, is a quota. So I would speak in favour of a little bit of the bureaucracy which we have.
Winnie Agbon-Lahore from Global Government Forum. Sue, Owen, I wanted to ask you one follow-up question to the last one and then another one, if that's okay. You said the repercussions for public leaders not meeting the diversity targets would be a reduction in their bonus, and that failure would be very public. Can you tell us how big a percentage of that salary would be held back just for the diversity bit of the objectives? And
okay.
how come you're saying it's public? Because meeting objectives of perm sex hasn't been public.
So senior leaders in the civil service get a base amount of pay, which, by the way, never goes up, or only by very small amounts. And then the top 25% of each grade of people will get a performance bonus of a fixed amount that isn't part of your salary. It's just a one-off payment. It's not part of your pension or anything like that. And so if the Cabinet Secretary does this properly and insists that people won't, the top 25% need to have met their diversity targets to be in the top 25%, they will not get that performance bonus. And all our salaries are published in our annual accounts, so anyone who's nerdy enough to want to go and look it up, they could. That won't be the case for people below the top job. Their salaries aren't published in the same way.
And my other question was, how many perm secs that are women are there?
6.
6. And isn't that an indication that sticking to aspirational targets hasn't worked so far?
Well, there are 6 and 2 with permanent secretary status. There was at one point, I think, 8, but it is absolutely the case. We have to really keep up the effort on this. You know, the numbers can go up, but then they can go down as well.
Okay, and for more on that, you can read Kath Haddon and Joe Devani's excellent study on women and Whitehall, which I should have plugged earlier.
Yeah.
More, but Sue did a very good job on that. Let's go to more questions from the audience. Yes.
My name is Jessica Ablescroft. I work for a big UK NGO. We've talked a lot about tokenism, and it seems like sometimes when we were talking about tokenism tonight, we're framing it in a way that women feel like they're the token woman because there isn't a critical mass either on those boards, or I think there are some examples have been brought up, for example, at the Treasury when women were brought in just to try and get more women. Is it because, do those women feel marginalized because there just aren't enough women? And do we risk kind of bringing 1 or 2 people up and then getting this kind of backslide effect because women don't feel like they're making the progress because there aren't enough voices?
So I think, Sue, that almost goes to your sort of batch approach, isn't it? Of actually sort of not being the only one and coming through.
Well, I mean, I think on your specific question, there's a couple of points here. So in very senior roles, you do need to know something about the organisation on the whole. You can bring people in from outside, but it works in some cases, it doesn't work in others, and there is a kind of organisational culture, and if you don't fit into that, that can be quite kind of scary. But I do think also that the critical mass point is really quite important, and you know, if there are whatever percentage it is, 25 or 30, it is a lot easier than if you're the only one.
So, Joe, is there a critical mass issue in Parliament?
Well, there is. I think, you know, it was good that the number of women MPs went up again, although still not managed to break through the 1/3 even in 2015. But I think what you would get, there would be some debates where there would be almost equal numbers of men and women. I found in BIS, actually, there was a very strong senior civil service team. So the level immediately below the Perm Secretary was 50-50 men and women. So you would realise in those scenarios you just stopped being aware of gender. It just wasn't an issue. You weren't aware of being the only woman in the room, or you weren't aware, you know, as I said to Andre this evening, oh, you're the token man tonight. You know, it just wasn't an issue. And I think that's where you want to get to, because, I mean, I'm sure the women in the room will all know the feeling of, being one of, maybe you're the only woman or one of two women in the room, and, you're thinking something that is a point about women that you have to make, because you realise that, if you don't say it, nobody else is going to do it. But you've also got other points you want to make as well, and you can feel a little bit like, oh, am I going to be the one that sticks up my hand and goes, what about the woman, again, what about this half of the population that you keep forgetting? So I think the critical mass certainly helps with all those issues, and people back each other up as well. I think Parliament it's sort of inching ever closer, but it is depressingly slow. I think that what's really important in Parliament is that parties take the opportunity to make a difference, particularly when they have a large intake. So we saw that Labour's big increase in women in '97 wasn't just because of all-women shortlists. It was the combination of all-women shortlists and the fact that they had a large number of new MPs in the first place. If there's not a lot of new MPs coming in any given election, then your ability to do a lot about it is less good. From my party's perspective, that's the silver lining I look at, that we've got rid of our incumbency problem. I think we should have no less a goal than gender equality in our parliamentary group next time, and I think it is actually achievable in a way at the next election that it wouldn't have felt so previously.
Uschi, you want to come in?
Just one other quick comment on this. I mean, if I look at the Australian example, for example, where voluntary targets were introduced, and also voluntary publishing, that's actually led to a number of women saying that they are basically the token woman on a board because they had to have at least one. Whereas if you have quotas that set a societal standard, so a societal expectation that says this is the kind of expectation we have of the number of women on a board, not just one token woman, it actually helps women to be on that board, because as Joe is saying, I mean, it makes a very, very big difference if you're not the only woman, but you can back each other up. And you can actually enforce each other's messages when the usual thing happens, which is a woman says something and then 5 minutes later a guy says it and it's a revelation. It does in fact help then if there is another woman in the room who says, hey, didn't person X just say that, right? So that actually speaks very, very strongly for quotas, because you set a societal standard rather than have token women on boards.
Okay, well, we're nearing the end of the time. I want to leave time to vote. So what I'm going to do is ask a number of people to come in with sort of quick contributions, and then we're going to go through the panel and ask them to make one final plea for your vote, and then we'll start colouring and counting. So I think the lady has a microphone. Do you want to? I just had it. Okay, we'll go back. See who else wants to.
Hi, I just wanted to make the point that it's a bit like what Uschi was just saying, but there's a problem with the token woman thing, and there's only one woman around, they're representing all women. If they do something bad, then that's it's easy to say, oh, well, they're a woman. I just wonder whether, when we think about quotas and we think, oh, well, people will think they're just token women, and if they do something wrong, there might be backsliding, and that would be terrible. But because there'll be more women there'll be 4 or 5, it'll be quite easy if one of them does something bad, as guys do too. Oh, well, they're just not very good, rather than all women aren't. So I wonder if that would be a protective thing, actually.
Okay,
great point.
Straight away, we're going to go to the back here.
Oh, Caitlin O'Keefe, I'm an account director at J. Walter Thompson. Question to those in favour of the motion. I'm still not sure why we think there should be quotas when, if we agree that we're all here tonight, EY have put women at the top of their agenda, McKinsey have, all the big ad agencies, media agencies, government. Do we not think it's now in the collective consciousness so much that actually the new generation of women coming up the ranks will fight for this and talk about this much more in a forum like this, that actually quotas might be introduced too soon? And I'm still not convinced that actually we can't let it naturally happen in such forums as this, and all the media Evening Standard, you pick it up, it's the front page, and it's a question and a rambling point, but that's it.
That's fine. Over here.
Hi, Lorna Sutton, Treasury. Something that no one's really touched on tonight is the role of society in a broader sense than what organisations are doing, and I'm interested if any of the panel have any views on whether we could do more in terms of education, people at school age, or encourage families to support women as they grow up to enter organisations.
Okay. Any final people who want to come? Vicky's already had a go. Yes.
Thank you. We heard a bit about unconscious bias tonight, and what I found when I did some unconscious bias training was that I was really challenged myself. And what that training actually said was that everybody has an unconscious bias.
Absolutely.
So is an unconscious bias actually, can we beat that? And if not, what does that mean for policy?
Thanks. Sarah Charles, Professor of Politics and Gender, University of Bristol. I'm interested for those in the room who are against quotas, whether you believe the playing fields in economics, business and politics are level or not. Because if they're not level, then isn't discrimination going on? And doesn't discrimination need to be tackled? We don't normally leave discrimination to the vagaries of time.
Mm-hmm. That goes to Andre's point about the non-neutral choice or whatever. Come back.
Thank you. Just thinking about whether we really moved at all recently. There are only 6 women CEOs of FTSE 100 companies. And at the executive level, in terms of appointments, there are only 10% of the executive jobs that are held by women. I just wonder how long, for those of you who don't want quotas, you're happy to put up with that.
Okay, my colleague Emily, who's been live tweeting, is very desperate to come in.
I just wanted to say something that I think Frances was suggesting that I've rather enjoyed, and I hope it is what she was saying, which is that if organisations don't have women in them, then they deserve to fail. That seems to be your point, which is wonderful in a private sector sense, but of course we can't have that in the public sector.
Okay, let's go to our panel for sort of final closing comments. So we'll do it in... We'll sort of go back into the order we went. So we'll start off, let's do it in the reverse order. We'll start with Joe, then we'll go to Silvana, and then do that. And give Uschi the final word.
I've got lots of thoughts on all those questions. I'll try and stay disciplined and just a couple of comments. I think the point that lady at the back made about the new generation really wanting to fight for equality, I think this is an important part of the context, and I take huge succor from the fact that the new wave of feminism is much more aware. People are prepared to talk about it in a way that they weren't before, and identify and demand equality. And I think that is something which is a really helpful trend. But in terms of that wider society thing, this is not just a problem in business, it's not just a problem in politics, it is the wider centuries-old problem of gender inequality, which is absolutely ingrained, and therefore the solution is a complex one. But in terms of one thing I really think society needs to change, is it's not just about changing women and getting women to act differently, it's also about the role of men and men acting differently. It's why my proudest achievement as a government minister was introducing shared parental leave, because when we actually get men able to admit that they have children and they have those responsibilities, then they suddenly have a stake in the workplace changing as well. So I think that part of this answer has to be about wider equality outside of the workplace as well. And if you want a light-hearted look at some of those issues, I would just wholeheartedly recommend the Twitter feed at Man Who Has It All that I discovered this week, which just puts into wonderful relief some of the ridiculous things that get said about whether working women can possibly juggle it all.
Silvana.
Well, thank you. I'd just like to get back to some of the comments that were made. Quotas protecting women. I do believe that this is absolutely true, because what we see right now, of the few women that there are either in political leadership or in business leadership, if they fail or if one of them fails, it's a whole gender issue. All women are incapable of doing X, Y, or Z as a job, whereas if one of the many men fails, it's his individual problem. It's him who wasn't good enough for the job. So I do believe that quotas are protecting in a way that you have always the critical mass to fall back onto, and to also have a variety of female leaders as different kinds of role models, because what we also see in politics as well as in other senior positions, that it is a certain age group, it's a certain kind of woman prototype who gets into leadership, and other women, and we don't want this replicate, we don't want the kind of male, white, straight guy problem on the female side. So this is not what we are aiming for. So a greater variety helped by quota is something certainly that would increase that possibility. Is it too early to introduce quota? I think it's a high time to introduce quota. We've been having a feminist movement for many, many years. We finally get to a general perception, not in all countries, but a general perception more or less that women are kind of equal. You can find that also in more and more constitutions. Well, you have in countries where wives are number 8 in the inheritance line. So there is huge issues still outstanding, which are challenging just the basic equality, and so I don't think it's too early. And countries like UK, like many European countries, should take this leadership role. And finally, I always love when Viviane Reding, who was the sort of mother of the EU quota legislation, who actually got all her male colleagues who had portfolios in the economic space on board to be the co-sponsors of this directive. When she, going back, talks about the different arguments that were used. So when she was young, it was said that women biologically are not able to sit on boardrooms because they just need to go to the bathroom too many times. They can't sit through long meetings. Now this argument isn't seriously made anymore. Then the next argument wave was there aren't enough qualified women. Now this argument is done and dealt with as well. We can see the high number of women excelling with university degrees, also going into middle management positions, doing an extremely good job there. So there are board-ready women in large numbers. And now the next argument is that women actually don't want it. Now, this is obviously another very subtle and very difficult to measure argument. And I think what is really important is the general discussion that we have had here also is what kind of power, what kind of decision making do we actually want, and is it something that women need to adapt to, or isn't it? If women come in a critical mass, this kind of decision making processes and the kinds of decisions can be changed. I think for that quotas are really important.
So I'm going to go for very quick comments to the rest of the panel because I'm keen to vote and I'm keen to go for drinks. So Frances.
We all are.
Okay, I think we've all heard from both sides actually. There's a very strong and clear business case for having women on board. No question about that. But as a woman on a board who's made it all the way through without any quotas and seeing the fantastic array of talented women coming through, I would much sooner, we were very vocal about it and we did it ourselves, than somebody over there pointed a finger and said, you need to do that.
Okay. Andre.
There was a generation of women who are deeply passionate about changing society and talked about in the media, and they were called the suffragettes, right? And I don't see a lot has changed. I mean, things have changed in the last 100 years, but according to some measures, they might be going backwards. So I think we need to kind of keep up the pressure and do bold things. Second point, can I just have one more point? It's very short. There's a lot of talk in boardrooms and middle management about unconscious bias training at the moment. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence that it works very well. The evidence base is pretty thin. I would actually prefer to think about our conscious biases. And I have a conscious bias which is very strong for equality. So I think that maybe we should be clear about our conscious biases and ask for them and do things very clear for them. And one of those things would be a quota.
Sue.
Okay, let's face it, it's not going to happen in the UK. Let's just get on with helping women and underrepresented groups up into middle and top management, keep up the pressure and increase transparency.
Uschi.
Yeah, finally, it's not one or the other. So I think that quotas are important because they create the trigger at the right time to do all the other things we have to do about driving systemic change. And I don't have the patience to wait another 40, 60, 80 years, not a lifetime, until we actually get women represented equally. And there's no question that women should be represented equally. So it's not just quotas, it's quotas as the trigger to driving systemic change in organizations that, you know, our colleagues opposite have also argued for.
Okay, thank you. Well, you've heard the debate. So now, if you'd like to raise your cards again, as you remember with the helpful handy nudge here, it's blue if you're in favour, yellow if you're against. And my helpful...
Oh, thank you.
And remember, you can vote in the next door room as well. People who've lost their cards. There are more cards here if people want them. So, okay, my helpful counters are counting. Hopefully knowing what they're counting. Okay, while they're doing that, I think we're taking you as read. You're not in the debate. You're whatever. While they're counting, I just want to thank all our speakers for an absolutely terrific and interesting, very lively debate. It would be interesting feedback you have. Hashtag women leaders, of course, if you want to comment any more or join the thing. And we might end up with, shall I get my people to declare what their results are? Then I'll have to do some online arithmetic. Lauren, how many from next door? 14 for and 7 against. Nicole?
9 against and 16 for.
Okay, I hope someone's adding, because you've done them in the reverse order now. I'll ask Julian, our Deputy Director, who's also an economist, do it. And finally on this side? 25 for and 7 against. Nicole is going to add those numbers up very quickly. What? The motion won, but did it change? Did it change? That's the question. We will tweet the definitive view, benchmarked to a norm on whether the side that won actually increased your support for the motion or not. But meanwhile, could you thank all our speakers? And thanks again to our friends at EY for sponsoring this event and for providing us with 2 of the speakers. And could I just remind you that if you want to think about whether things have got worse or better, certainly in the civil service, Kath and Joe's report on women in Whitehall will, I think, convince you that there has been some progress at least there. So do read that. So thank you all very much for coming and join us for drinks.